Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. How did Native Americans land in the Americas? We'll find out that a popular theory about the Bering Strait isn't necessarily what happened. So Dr. Thomas Murphy will explain more about this, and we'll talk about the similarities between Native Americans in North and South America and how they're different than modern populations. This is a piggyback on our last conversation where we talked about why modern Egyptians aren't as similar in DNA as ancient mummies. Check out our conversation.
In the Americas, you could say, Native Americans make up 1-2% of the population, right? You could say well over 90% of the DNA that's present in the United States today was not present before Columbus, before the Vikings at least. That's would be a similar scenario. So, either the Muslim invasions might have been a reason, or the movement of people from sub-Saharan Africa into Egypt in a later period results in that greater diversity among Egyptian population today than there was in the past. But that doesn't mean that that Egyptians were white, or it doesn't mean that, the types of jumps that you have to make with the Book of Mormon just are not there in that scenario. Just because Europeans and African DNA is much more common in the Americas today, doesn't mean that they were present in the ancient past. And so, in a sense, that article shows that migration continues and those sorts of things happen, and that you won't always see a direct historical continuity in a particular place. But if you look at the rest of the world and you look at the Americas, there's more historical continuity in the Americas than there is in anywhere else in the world. And so, as I gave in the examples in my own neighborhood of the oldest fossils in our area, there's direct continuity. And that's uncommon in the old world, but it's common in the new world.
Direct continuity, okay, because we have a history of England for 1,000 years and Germany for 1,000 years and Israel for 2,000 years, whereas in America we've only got a continuity of 400 years. Is that what you're saying?
No, in the Americas, the dating of the entry into the Americas is, hugely debated. I mean, there's some archaeological evidence suggesting 130,000 years ago, but the DNA evidence, suggests that indigenous people were separated from their closest Asian relatives around 30,000 years ago. And then we're finding more and more archaeological evidence pushing that date of the migration back, but our challenge is there's not a lot of fossils older than 12,000 years old in the Americas. There's some archaeological sites and stuff that we found in the Americas that are older than that. But there's still, the DNA suggests that the ancestors of American Indians have been here longer than anthropologists typically thought. They used to think. And so now we're much more open to the idea that people were here before the Ice Age. And it's really the Ice Age that is kind of the controlling factor there. The assumption of most anthropologists before the rise of DNA evidence was that people came after the melting of the ice, the end of the Ice Ages. So that would put it after 12,000 years ago, the ancestors of American Indians came. But, just down the road from me, there's the mastodon's got a bone, or a point. I think it's a stone point embedded in the bone that's older than the Ice Ages, 13,000 years old. And so, how did it get there if there weren't people, right? And so people, probably most definitely, I think we can say now, arrived here before the Ice Ages. And that raised the point of how did they get here? Because the idea before was that there was this land bridge, and then there was an ice-free corridor between two of the glaciers that opened up, and that people must have come down through that ice-free corridor. Well, they actually looked at, they actually looked at the ice-free corridor and looked at the ecology of it using this environmental DNA work. And the plants and animals weren't there to sustain people early enough for that to be a viable entry point for the people into the Americas. So, from my perspective, that's been refuted. That
so there's not a land bridge? They had to come a different way, not on the land bridge? Is that what you're saying?
They had to come from Asia, because that's where the relatives are. But coming through an ice-free corridor from basically the Beringia through an ice-free corridor into the Americas, that we know that's wrong now. And this is, recent anthropological.
Because it seems like Ugo told me that the Beringia was how they came, and you're saying that's not true anymore. They had to come a different way.
They could have still come through Beringia. They still could have come through Beringia, in the sense that there were people in Beringia for sure, okay? And in areas that weren't covered with ice, okay? And those people may have probably used the coastal migration. That's what's kind of coming more into the
so they came by boats instead of walking. Is that what you're saying?
Is some scientists the highway, and the idea is that being watercraft, canoes, or so on, came along the coastal regions, finding these little refugia of spots where there was not glacier ice, or some of those around, and living in those areas, and then kind of spreading down the coast gradually as generations expand and people expand. Or maybe like the Pacific Islanders, maybe they were deliberately trying to find more land and exploring, and rather than just kind of natural growth, they coming more quickly. And I've been working with this group locally that's working on the Chehalis River hypothesis, where we're looking at the possibility of having come through the Chehalis River Valley, because that was opened up south of the glaciers much earlier. And so we're kind of targeting some sites, and we do have the Manus site that supports that, but we're targeting areas where we can look more for that archaeological evidence and see if we can substantiate more of an entry through the Chehalis River Basin. And so that's kind of the latest anthropological work, and I think I've gone on another tangent for you.
All right. Well, yeah, I didn't mean to belabor that point, but and I've kept you a long time, so I told you we were going to be a lot shorter than we were, but that's how it always happened. So is there anything else you want to talk about as far as the essay? Anything that we've missed?
Well, I do really want to emphasize that one of our major criticisms of the essay is again the failure to take Indigenous voices seriously, Indigenous perspectives. If the Book of Mormon is a story about Indigenous people, then European Mormons should not be the only ones telling the story. Okay, the Indigenous people should be a part of our dialogue, should be engaged with us in telling their own stories. It's not the prerogative. It's not the prerogative of settler colonists to tell Indigenous histories. And we are suggesting that DNA evidence shows that Mormons have claimed a privilege to tell Indigenous histories that was never granted in the first place and never deserved. Okay, we need to let Indigenous people tell their own stories. We need to listen to Indigenous stories on their own terms, and that's what BYU is working on. Okay, in this book, that's what Gina Cove and Joanna Brooks are bringing forth here in Decolonizing Mormonism, and Angelo in my essay is the only one that kind of takes that perspective in this book, but that's the future of Mormon studies, is more of a dialogue, more of an engagement with Indigenous people, instead of pretending that we those of us of European ancestry are the authorities, and that Indigenous people simply have myths and legends, and they don't know their own history. We know their history because we've got it in the Book of Mormon. That's arrogant, and it's wrong. It's ethically wrong. It's morally wrong. And so if we think we have history, then let's sit down and share histories. Let's share our stories in a format that empowers Indigenous voices. And I give credit to Matt Harris and Newell Bringhurst in allowing me to work with Angelo Baca and bring in his perspective into this article. And so it's a step in the right direction. And it's a step in the right direction that we're seeing at the Red Center at BYU. It's a step in the right direction that we're seeing out of University of Utah Press and the Decolonizing Mormonism. But we've got a long ways to go. Right now, Mormon studies is predominantly a settler colonial narrative with our own projections and fantasies of what Indigenous history is, instead of actual Indigenous history told by Indigenous people themselves.
Well, cool. All right. Well, Thomas Murphy, are you working on any other books that you want to share with us really quick?
Well, I have quite a few articles in the works. There's a University of Illinois Press book coming out about Mormons and marriage, Mormon men and marriage, edited by Holly Welker. And in it, I tell the story of my relationship with my wife of 35 years, and kind of a perspective of wrestling with our Mormon heritage, and both of us have Native heritage, and kind of how we've reconciled over our time together those heritages in connection with our relationship. And the hardest part of that is telling the story of her stroke that changed the trajectory of my career, and it explains at least a little bit why I had more time to focus on Mormon studies, because I'm now her caregiver. And I used to spend a lot of time outdoors in the field, and that's not feasible with my new responsibilities. But I can, as you can see with the books, I can read and write a lot and still be a good caretaker. So you're going to see a lot more from me. So that's one thing that's coming out. The Journal of Northwest Anthropology has one of my favorite articles. It doesn't really have anything to do with Mormons, though, but it's called No One Asked for an Ethnography, 20 years of community-based anthropology in Coast Salish country. And so it's the story of my work with Coast Salish nations and developing a decolonized approach to teaching anthropology. So that should be out in fairly shortly in the Journal of Northwest Anthropology. And let's see what else. I've got an article coming out from Tory Press. Kim Anderson is one of the editors of this piece, and it's Blossoms of the Cliff Rose or something like that. It's an anthology on Mormons and the environment. And in it, I kind of tell the story of being a Mormon Boy Scout in Idaho, and then transition from kind of the exploitation and even the mimicry of Indigenous traditions to then, as an adult, exploring my own ancestry and working as an archaeology student in a field school where I found human remains and how we handled that versus how Mormons tend to handle Native American bodies, to come back to that theme. And so my wrestling with what was called repatriation, who do the bones of Native American ancestors belong to? And who has the right to study them? Who has the right to decide what to do with them? And so it kind of tells that story, and particularly my search for my Native ancestor, Susanna Ferguson, whose Mohawk, and kind of looking at our inability to find her grave in the midst of all these missing Native American women and men whose bodies disappeared. Is she in some lab somewhere? Kind of looks at it from that perspective. So that's a little bit. I'm also working on a book that is kind of taking a decolonizing perspective to the Book of Mormon. So looking at the Book of Mormon within the context of the Indigenous, the Haudenosaunee people in Joseph Smith's area. And I kind of the main arguments are that Indigenous people were present during the founding events of the Book of Mormon in ways that Mormon historians have not recognized. And that there are some interesting, we can call them parallels between Haudenosaunee and neighboring tribal traditions in the Book of Mormon. There's interest, how did they get there? So, some Book of Mormon characters that look an awful lot like historical characters. And I don't want to give it all away, but a lot of this has not been published before. Okay, some of it, there are a lot of other people that have recognized Samuel the Lamanite and Samson Occam, this Mohegan preacher, look an awful lot alike and talk awful lot alike and behave similarly. Other people have pointed that out. But there's a lot more than Samuel the Lamanite. There's historical characters that correspond with a number of Book of Mormon characters, so that's going to be coming out in a book eventually. I've got 9 chapters out of 13 done.
Wow.
In the first draft, but I went back to work full time last week, so we'll see. My pace is going to slow down in these next 4 chapters, but within a few years, I hope that'll be coming out. I did give a preview of some of that work in a Sunstone presentation, in the last Salt Lake City Sunstone. So those that are curious, but that's a little bit of what I'm up to.
Was that the online one? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The online symposium.
I think. So if you haven't seen that, I just got an email saying that you can still register and watch the recordings. And if you already registered, then you can watch those recordings as well, as I understand it. So I'll have to check that one out. I missed it. I was moderating too much. All right. Well, Thomas Murphy, I appreciate you spending so much time. We definitely got in a lot deeper than just the essay, which was kind of cool. And so I love the work that you've done, and I'm glad to have you here on Gospel Tangents. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Thomas Murphy. Tom, thanks for sitting down with me and talking for such a long time. It was great learning more about you and great to get your expertise. If you haven't purchased the Gospel Topic Series book yet, it's on sale now. So here's a link at Amazon where you can get a copy of that book. So definitely, it's a great book. I highly recommend this great book from Signature Books. In our next conversation, I'm excited to have a guest host, and we're going to talk to Richard Turley, who's recently retired from the Church History Department. We'll talk about how he was hired first following the surprising Mark Hoffman bombings.
When I arrived in January of 1986 in the Church History Department, there were good aspects of the department, there were bad aspects. The bad aspects were that I essentially entered a crime scene. The Mark Hoffman bombings had occurred just a little over 3 months earlier. There were federal, state, and county and city investigators who were trying to find out the motive for those 3 bombs that went off, killing 2 people and injuring a 3rd.
For those of you who are interested in the entire interview uncut without any interruptions, sign up at patreon.com/gospeltangents and you can hear the entire interview for just $5 a month. Also, we have other tiers. If you'd like to subscribe on our website at gospeltangents.com, click on the yellow subscribe button and you can subscribe for $10. You can also do that on Patreon and get a PDF transcript. We've also got some other ones for $15 and $20 if you'd like to get those as well. If you're interested in individual transcripts, go to amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview, and you can see our past interviews there in paperback form. So just check out Gospel Tangents. We're always updating those. For the latest updates on Facebook, go to facebook.com/gospeltangents, and you can see our latest updates there. We're also on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. Of course, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And please give us a 5-star rating for those of you who listen to audio only. So once again, thanks for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again.